Organizational impact. This is an interview about moving forward with teams with Barbara Hauser, who I will introduce in a moment. My name is Stella Orange, and I am part of the marketing team here at the Institute for Generative Leadership. I'm also a student of generative leadership, so you will watch me here learning along with those of you who might be new to some of the practices and distinctions that Barbara will be sharing here with us today. So I am learning as well. It's actually Barbara who made the suggestion when we were preparing for this conversation. She said, Stella, show up as a student. Show up in the spirit of curiosity and learning. Welcome, Carrie. Good to see you here. So I will be doing my level best to bring a mood of curiosity as well as gratitude to all of the people, and maybe some of you are those people that I haven't met yet, who have made it part of your life's work to bring forward this work to the rest of us so that we can bring it to our corners of the world, into our organizations, our families, our neighborhoods, our communities. This is very much a person-to-person and people-to-people body of work that we are very much practicing together. So as someone who is a newcomer, I just want to say thank you for tending the flame of this work together. It's a beautiful thing to be a part of and to witness. So a bit of housekeeping before we go into today's topic. There is going to be time for questions and for your responses later on in today's call. I am going to ask you a couple questions here as we're getting the conversation going, so I'll ask for your responses on the chat. But after that, my request is that we leave the chat quiet. You're going to see me put my attention on Barbara, and I ask that you do as well. And so my request is that as I'm interviewing Barbara, if a question arises for you, or a response, or something that you want to ponder further, either with us in a group today, or perhaps on your own time, just keep a pen, maybe a pad of paper close, and just jot it down there. We're going to keep the chat quiet when we're talking with Barbara, and then we will be holding space for folks to ask some questions or perhaps offer a response. We are intending to hold space to provoke some new ways of thinking about whatever situations perhaps have compelled you here in your own life to come here looking for new ways of being, new ways of conversating, new ways of having conversations with the teams in your corner of the world. Maybe you're leading those teams. Maybe you're a coach or consultant who's supporting those teams. So we are very much gathering here in the spirit of discovery and seeing something new happen. But let's keep the chat quiet while Barbara's speaking. Sound good? We ready? All right. I love the thumbs up thing in this community. It makes my heart so happy to be a part of that. Yeah, okay. Okay, so here we are. We are entering into the final quarter of this year. Final quarter of this year. Holy smokes, how did that happen? And maybe you are finding yourself in a situation where you are on a team or you're leading a team and things aren't getting done in the way that you had hoped. Or there is a long list of things that still need to get done, and you're looking at that. And whether you're a team leader or an executive, or maybe the coach or consultant that serves them, there can be a tendency to, in that situation, take on more and more of that onto your own shoulders, or take more onto your own plate. We see that all the time. It's incredibly common. Or maybe you've got an increasing sense that now is the time to do some more planning or revisit a plan that you've held with other people. Or maybe you're noticing a mood of frustration or agitation or even impatience because tick-tock goes the clock and you're not getting other people moving forward like you had hoped. Show of hands, for those of you who are so inclined, do any of those situations sound familiar with a place you have ever been before in your career, or maybe a place that you find yourself now? Okay, I'm seeing a few hands up. Okay, good. And I would also ask if you've got a pen and paper handy to just take a couple moments here and jot down, maybe I didn't nail it. What is it for you that's relevant or important about this conversation about moving teams forward on something that matters? Why is it important for you to be here today inside of this conversation? We're just going to hold space for that and just be quiet for you to just be with your thoughts. And if you want to just think about it, Kim Har, or write it down. So I'm just going to hold some quiet space for that reflection. Right. And for those of you who'd love to share or don't mind sharing, maybe we don't oversell it, you can pop it in the chat, just in a couple words, so that Barbara can get a sense of who's here and what might be top of mind for you and what she might be able to speak to inside of the interview that might make it even more relevant for you. So just in a few words in the chat. What sorts of questions or situations or challenges or curiosities are you bringing with you into this conversation? Federico offers that it's always a challenge to make teams take action, sharing something in common. Getting more alignment and accountability on cross-functional teams, says Jana. There's so much to do, says Dee Dee, especially in the nonprofit spaces. And while there's little money, driving motivation and energy can help meet goals. Hi, Gary, welcome. Howie is facilitating a nonprofit group of 20 next week, Barbara. Most participants don't know him. How do you begin a workshop session to bring people together for the same care? Ooh, yeah. Audrey is curious about how to change mental models that might be hindering the team from moving in a new direction. Let me know, Barbara, if you need me to slow down. I can see you writing.
No, it's good.
All right, cool. Kim is thinking about moving forward towards action, especially when some team members don't see choices. Kevin, I've been carrying this care ever since you said it a couple of weeks ago on a webinar, how to build trust among a team. This is a new one from different cultures, both Western and Eastern international cultures. Work that matters always involves teams. And this is the crux, right, of the organizational impact. I think you had said to me, Barbara, that teams are what impact organizations, not necessarily at the individual level. Okay. Mm-hmm. Newell's dealing with changing membership of teams in a VUCA world. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking about that. Vision. Yeah. What is it? Yeah. Volatile, uncertain. I can't remember, but VUCA. How to shift generative practices midstream, wonders Carrie. Stephen says opening teams to new care conversations and taking collective actions. We've got some nods there. So much to do and changed and determining where to start. Good. And Andres is committed to making bigger promises to address the big challenges we face as humanity. It requires building teams that are making a certain vision of the future possible. And Andrea is curious to hear ways to move new teams forward as each individual is getting to know one another. and finding their own voice and also amplifying others' voices on the teams. Oh, this one too makes my armpit sweat, Andrea or Andrea. Pacing during beginning stages can be tricky. So this is about bringing teams together. And then Valeria offers learning more about generating actions. If you have a team stuck and can move forward, the impact on the results is great. Good. So we got some things on our minds that are compelling us to be here, right?
Yeah, awesome.
So without further ado, I want to introduce you, Barbara.
Thank you.
And turn this over to you now that you've heard what we are bringing with us here to this conversation today.
Awesome.
So this is Barb. May I introduce you first?
Please, please,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Barbara Hauser, ladies and gentlemen. Barbara, who has worked with over 500 business professionals in the last 25 years. And she said, it's been longer than that this morning to me. Many of them new to their role. Her coachees have been responsible for producing outstanding bottom line results. And Barbara teaches them a really unique framework that gives them a listening and positioning advantage. Those she has coached have consistently outperformed expectations and have been lucky to have her as a teacher and coach. And we are lucky to have her as a teacher and coach in the Generative Leadership Program. We're also exceedingly lucky to have you here today. I know you are a woman who is in demand and traveling the world. Every time we talk, you are in a new country. So welcome, Barbara. We are really glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I had a different question planned for us, but based on what's showing up in the room, I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the concerns that people are bringing with them through a generative lens. When you see questions about convening teams, making bigger promises, getting teams to reorganize around a shared care, or you're finding that we didn't talk about cares at the beginning and now we're having to clean things up or have a missing conversation. Where do we start?
Love that question. Where do we start? Right? Wow. And before we even go there and start, thank you so much for the way you're being at the opening of this conversation. I really appreciate the care, the attention that you're placing on those who are in the room today. And so I'm going to admit to something. My heart's beating really fast. And I have about 5 different responses in my head going on at the same time. And as you said, we didn't prepare exactly for this array of questions, which is probably a really good thing. One of the reasons my heart is beating fast is that although I've been in this practice, I counted it up today, 15 years. There are people in the room who have been in the practice longer. And I know there are people in the room who perhaps are just learning about generative leadership today. So what's going on inside of me is how do we bridge that gap? So I'd like this to be a conversation. So talking about where to start, I can say from my experience that both my great successes in my own practice as a leader, a business owner, a manager, and now more in the consulting and coaching side of it, have always been because I've been a part of a very effective team. And I can also say that my low points in my career, and there have been many, have basically suffered because the team that I was a part of was probably not as effective. And so one of the things I'd like to entertain for us today is the concept of team leadership through a generative lens. And so looking out at different frameworks and philosophies and ways of looking at teams. And by the way, I think most of us were pretty mesmerized during the Olympics with all of this amazing teamwork and team action, right? And I think many of us would probably be hearing that teams are basically a group of people that come together for a common purpose. And I don't think they'd be wrong by saying that. But at least in the learning that I've done through the Institute, we learned that it's not wrong, but it's not enough. And I'm thinking particularly about, and you'll excuse me on this because I'm kind of a fanatic, but I'm thinking particularly about the US men's basketball team. Now, these guys were supposed to win, right? But as things happened, it turned out that others also had a shared purpose and they wanted to take that gold away from them. So it wasn't enough just to have a common purpose. What happened there, and what I'd like to point to, is that team leadership shows up in each member of the team. In other words, we don't have to depend on the personality of the leader. And we can talk also about the importance of a leader, right? The importance of a leader in setting a mission for a team. But that leadership on a team can show up from any place, from any member of the team, if the conditions are right. So one of the things that I'd like to say as a start is that we start by listening. And you spoke earlier about the advantage of having listening and a positioning advantage when we're working within, right, and with other teams. Yeah, so I would say we start with the listening, like what's central to each person's role and capacity to share what the leader is proposing as the mission of the team. And what we commonly call this within the community, and again, learning with the community is probably the best thing about IGL, among all the other distinctions and practices and things like that. And what we learn is that each person on that team, when they sign up to be part of that team, they sign up to be part of that mission. And so we want to be sure that everyone on the team is crystal clear about why we exist. And I said that anybody on the team can initiate. And what I mean by initiating is that they can bring the conversation. So something else that we learned through a generative lens is that commitment always flows from a conversation. And so again, that being said, right? Like, I don't know where we're going. Can you help us to understand where we're going? Really valid question, right? Really valid question. And oftentimes what we find on teams is that we don't use our voice, right? To share and to manifest, hey, I'm not exactly sure what it is. So shared mission and then shared promise, right? And that's where we understand through a generative lens, we want to start with, okay, so what is the team's promise? And this sounds very, very foreign, I think, initially. I don't know, Stella, you can tell us, right? 4 months into the learning, you're going like, really? I'm going to make a promise? What's that all about, right?
Yeah, I mean, also I'm not someone that hangs out in corporate meetings, so I realize that culturally, I tend to show up in a very particular space. So that's something that I don't necessarily have as a common reference point with a lot of the people in the room.
Nice, nice. So again, right? So many things are going on in my head, but I'm thinking new people. I think it was Newell who said new people come in and new people and other people leave the team. How do we stay connected, right? And part of that is the sensing, the knowing that when new people come onto the team, it's our responsibility to be sure, right, that that other person is also understanding the same thing we're understanding or is adding to that understanding
Got it.
of what is possible for that team.
Hmm. Can you say more about promise? Because that is something that I'm like, okay, so the generative lens, like as I understand it as a student, there is a way that we can look, like glasses that we can look through, lens that we can put sight through that helps us see something new about a situation that's around us. And part of the, what I would say, the promise of generative leadership is that if you enter a conversation like this, you can see something new about a conversation you're already having with your team or a situation you're already in with other people. And there's something new that arises because there's an idea like a shared promise, which isn't like the status quo, right? Like, is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love when you point to the glasses, right?
Mm,
At the Institute, we talk a lot about distinctions. And that's a in my world, that's a big word.
okay.
But it's that ability to see something, either because I'm familiar with the domain, I'm familiar with the game, I'm familiar, for example, going back to the basketball thing, right? How would you know if one of your teammates is in a position to do something that's going to further you towards the fulfillment of your mission and your promise, right? Unless you see through a lens that allows you to do that.
That makes sense.
Right? And we all come to different situations, especially again when we're coordinating with other people. And we'll talk a minute about that promise piece when we're coordinating with other people where we have blind spots and so do they. Right? So oftentimes on a highly effective team, we'll serve each other by pointing those blind spots out or helping the other person to navigate those blind spots rather than saying, what's the matter with you? Right?
Right.
You don't get it. You don't belong, right? Stay in your own lane, which we hear so much of.
Interesting.
So all of that is possible when we're looking at teams through a generative lens.
So now so much is going through my mind. So, okay, so I want to bring you back though to promise and shared promise.
Back to promise, yeah.
From a generative perspective. So I guess my assumption is that in status quo conversations, we're not necessarily talking about a shared promise on a team. Is that unusual?
Not unusual at all.
Oh, okay.
We're typically talking about a shared goal.
Okay.
Right? And nothing wrong with a shared goal.
Okay.
But what happens when we refer to our future in terms of goals, right? We're oftentimes forgetting that it's us humans that come together and invest, right? Our talent, our time, our future to create the outcomes that we've all said that we've all promised that we're going to produce.
So I'm grinning because what's coming up for me is I think it's that Robert Frost poem. There's something that doesn't love a wall. And I'm thinking, oh, there's something that doesn't love a goal. Like goals don't necessarily keep us warm at night. Maybe they do, but you're pointing to sort of this very human thing Is that, am I,
Yeah, yeah. And again, at the center of our generative discourse, or the way we see the world, or the things, and believe me, there are still many things to discover, but at the center of it is that our questions, like, what is a team?
yeah,
What is, pardon me, a human being, right? And so by engaging in those conversations, we're engaging with that whole person, not just the part that churns out the results, not just the part
yes,
that deals with the tasks. It's the whole person.
I love this. And I'm wondering, can you tell us a story or some stories about what engaging with the whole person looks like?
Mm. Mm.
Like in from what you've seen from maybe some conversations or consulting work that you've been a part of, because my sense would be that's not where a lot of teams start. And they may not even realize that like they have there's something missing around activating or engaging the whole person. So is there anything that you've seen in your work that might help us sort of see what this whole person this caring for the whole person,
Mm.
this involving the whole person on a team might look like?
Yeah. Um, and I'm glad that you brought up the word care. We didn't finish with promise, but we'll come back to
Sure.
that. But so a situation came up with a client just about 2.5 years ago. And I was working with another one of our colleagues, Wendy Arnott. And when she came to me with this potential opportunity, she said, Barbara, you're going to like this on the one hand because this is a manufacturing environment. It's a downstream oil company. They produce propane gas. And you've had some experience in that. And I go, okay, great. I'm on board so far. And she said the company has been sold a couple of different times over the past few years. And the current owners and their management team on the ground are having a really hard time pulling together. In the years prior, they, out of frustration, the workforce had decided to unionize. There was just a lot of tension. And we have an opportunity to work with the new leader. And just for some color here, male dominant industry and organization, brand new female leader. And so when we went in, we did the safe maybe and common thing. We said we need to like meet these people before we go in and try to help the leader bring her team together.
Hmm.
And so we did a series of interviews and we spoke to everyone. And what emerged from those interviews was that they all shared a story of how awful the situation was
Hmm.
and how difficult and maybe impossible it was going to be to bring alignment into the organization. And so we said, okay, so that's going to be fun. How do we start? Yeah. And so we said, well, let's get to know the folks on the management team. And so we did so. We did interviews. We spoke to each one of them. And then we brought them together. And because of the generative learning, we made a strategic bet that underneath the story that each one of these managers was telling about the organization, the difficulties and so forth, there was a human being who really saw their future and as part of their future, their participation on this particular team. Why else would they be there, right? So we actually took a risk and opened up the conversation by asking each one of the members of the team to introduce themselves by sharing what it was they really cared about
Hmm.
for the future of the organization. And so I'll just make a long story short here. The story that they started out with was, again, everybody hates coming to work here. This is really hard. I don't even want to walk into my workspace because something is going to be wrong.
Hmm.
And at the end of it, they all looked at each other and said, wow, I didn't know you cared about
Interesting.
animals. And I didn't know you cared about
Hmm.
the volunteer work that you do after work. And I didn't know you really cared about. And so what happened was, what emerged from that, and these were several conversations, right? This was putting a team back together.
Putting a team back together.
Yeah. And so what emerged from that conversation was that they all were committed to creating a place where everybody wanted to go to work.
Hmm.
And if they did that, not only would they be satisfied, but their strategic bet is that if they took that story to the workforce, they would find in those people similar cares. Super powerful.
I can see that.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Well,
When
they're
a
now
management team, has a conversation like that, and you start, like, I imagine I would expect there's a chain reaction, but what happened?
It actually ignited a tremendous amount of energy,
Hmm.
respect for each other.
Yep.
A couple of people exited the team. They said, that's not where I want to put my energy over the next few years. And that was fine.
Yep.
Right. And what it helped the leader to see was that she wasn't dealing with, how can I say it? A bunch of, a bunch of uncommitted, unmotivated people. It's just that she had not seen before what their commitment was.
Uh-huh.
And therefore was not able to tap into the motivation that they already have to create a future that's different. So again, lots of conversations went into this engagement. I'm not saying it happened in one sitting, but the key piece and the key anchor was, let's talk about that thing we call.
So at this point, what I'm hearing, I think, let me check to see if this is true, is how do we move forward with teams? A very simple and hopefully not too terribly reductive answer is we we place a strategic wager. We bet, we take a risk and say, could it be that these are human beings just like me? And maybe there's a conversation for us to have around, as human beings, why we're here and what it's for and why we're bringing our life force to this place of work every day. And having I don't know what, I can just imagine that not necessarily being a conversation that gets had on a team unless someone brings it forth. And then it makes sense. Like, this is the direction of travel.
Bob Dunham would always, I think he would agree, right? That it's about the missing conversations.
Right?
Can
you say more?
The missing conversations.
Yes, I love this concept in friendship leadership.
Yeah.
What's a missing conversation?
Yeah, it's a conversation that we don't necessarily realize is a fundamental building block for a team or an organization or for a relationship, right?
Okay.
And so far, I think we've identified something like Newell can probably tell us this, or one of the folks, around 13 different conversations that actually constitute a team. Right? It's like they're the basic fundamental building blocks. And not just that we have one time, right? It's how do we keep a team alive?
Okay.
Right? We continue to have the conversations. Going back to your question about a promise, one of the things that we often are blind to as we're growing and building our teams is every team makes a promise to someone. There's a client out there. There's someone whom we have said, yes, this team will come together to produce this outcome, which is what makes us generative as well, right? Is that we generate a future, we produce outcomes.
I feel like there's a distinction there that I can't even see yet, Barbara, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, so oftentimes, and I'll just give you a really quick anecdote here around a coaching assignment that I had with a person who was leading a team, had transitioned from being an individual contributor into being a manager and a leader of a team. And when they came to the coaching engagement, they were really frustrated. It was like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to bring these people together? And one of the first things that we discovered is that there was, in this person's experience to date in the organization, they weren't exactly clear who they were not reporting to. Right? That was clear, right?
Yeah.
But who was the client for that output that they were working so hard to produce? And again, it was one of those light bulbs that came, that turned on. He's, wow, yeah, we exist, right, in service of, and it turned out it was in this particular case, another group, right? And we really never had the conversation with them about what they were expecting us to produce and how they wanted it. And so there was no promise, right?
Yes.
And so they were floundering.
So I think what I hear you, that helps. Thank you so much. That helps me see it. I think what I'm hearing you say is a promise also then, I'm married to a philosopher, everyone. So my brain has like armchair philosophy terms, necessarily puts us into relationship with for who? Who is this promise for? It's not just going out into a void or a vacuum. There's a relationship. And so sometimes we're not necessarily clear as a team or even as a leader of a team on the promise. And other times we talk about the promise, but we haven't necessarily seen, okay, but who is I think in the generative language, we'd say the customer, like who's going to be receiving that for the benefit of whom? Interesting.
Absolutely.
So that could be an example of another missing conversation or series of conversations that might set things aright.
Beautiful. Yeah, and within teams as well, we have oftentimes those relationships where I can be a producer, an executor of a certain action, right, in service of another person on the team who happens to be my customer in that particular interaction. Right?
I got it. It
shows us that interdependency that we talk about.
It helps us understand where we are and that we're in a web.
Yeah.
Okay.
And how it shows up in action, right? Because that's the other thing we want to be we want to be aware of is that as generative practitioners, we focus on our capacity to take action.
Yes.
And how that shows up.
Fantastic. I want to.
May I add one thing?
Gary, we're going to switch into response. So if you don't mind, I ask you to hold the thing.
Yep.
And then maybe you can share it with us in just a moment. So, Barbara, thank you. Thank you for this interview and for this conversation. I have certainly learned some things. And I want to turn it over to more of a conversation and interaction between you and the rest of the folks that are here with us. So I actually would like to hold a bit of time, just a few moments, for response for each one of you in the audience to just be with your own thoughts for a moment. I'm learning from one of my teachers in the program to just take a breath and let it in. Let whatever is coming settle into my bones a little bit. So I invite you to practice that along with me. Just taking a breath. Take it in a little bit. Okay, thank you. And as we move back into the we space, I invite you to share your questions or comments. I think, Gary, you wanted to add something. Now would be a great time to do that.
Okay.
I think you want to speak it into the space. Is that right?
I'm just going to just wanted to build on.
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what I've learned is that every team has a customer, but not every team member realizes that. Like we exist to serve somebody. And every customer also has a promise. And they hire teams to help them fulfill their promise.
Can you say that again for me? The last part. I'm with you until the last thing that you said.
Every customer has also made a promise.
Every customer has also made a promise, and they're hiring
a teams probably plural.
Yeah.
To help them fulfill their promise.
Yes. It's turtles all the way down.
Yes, yep. And then make assessments about the team. Does this team get my promise? Do they have the talent, the capacity to help me fulfill by New Year's Eve? That's all context.
Yes.
And if every team member is like, got it. And I love Barbara's, men and women's basketball USA. They all got it. So they work better as a team. But if people, I don't know who the customer is, I don't care about the customer, I don't know what their promise is, who cares, then the team members are going to go their own ways.
It's Harlem Globetrotters.
Yeah,
but they're a little bit more coordinated. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that clarification and that.
And that's
subtlety.
it's not, please don't hear it as the truth. It's just.
Yeah, I appreciate the.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else, you're welcome to speak it into the space, or if you'd like to type it into the chat. If there's questions that you have for Barbara or comments you'd like to make, or we've got folks that have been bringing forth this work and practicing it and bringing to others for a long time. So if there's anything else that you're moved to add with the rest of us, now's the time to do it. Now I will turn my attention to the chat, Barbara. And if there's any questions that I can pass along to you, I will. Yeah, here we go. And Frederico and Vaishnavi, I'm going to ask for your help on this too. Frederico has a hand raised. So let's see, Frederico, I think, can you unmute yourself?
Yes. Hi, Stella. Hi, everyone. Okay, so Barbara, first of all, thanks for this conversation. I resonate a lot with you when you say this thing about the importance of identifying a client, like the promise client. And what I want to ask you is, I have like my own client in my consultant practice, where they are a family, and they are all like equal, and no one wants to be more than the other one because they are family. So there's no like clear leader. They are all leaders. And my question is, what can you tell me about that? What happens when there is no clarity about these clients?
It's a great question. Yeah, and it's part of. So I'll just share with you my experience working with that type of a customer. And that is that those conversations about who's responsible for producing the outcome that you're there to help them produce are usually best held in the contracting space. And when they aren't, usually what we would call breakdowns happen, right? So who am I serving? Am I serving the team? Am I serving individual leaders within the team? Right. So there's one place to look at. But I would just say it's probably not too late to step back and say, hey, I think there was a missing conversation here. I'd like to get some clarity on what it is that you, as a team or as a family, right, are hoping to produce, and so that we can establish some what we would call conditions of satisfaction, right? How can we best serve you? Because without that, my sense is it's going to be hard to corral that group.
Good. We are nearing the end of our time, friends, and I know there's a lot of interest. So if you need to pop off to get to where you're going, great. Otherwise, Barbara, can we keep you for 10 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So everyone, thank you for being here. We've got a couple hands raised. We'll do that. And then I see one more question from Carrie in the chat, and then we'll wrap up. Juan, I saw your hand raised. Go ahead, Juan.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. And Barbara, thank you for being who you are. You know that I love you. Barbara, I was wondering from a coaching perspective. You mentioned briefly about the 13 conversations for constitutive teams. Can you share an example of how you introduce this for somebody or for a team that is not familiar with this course? And how do you go about introducing this to make the teams performing better?
It's a great question. The only answer I can say with any certainty is that not all at once. Not all at once. What I tend to do, and Newell, I'd love to hear your view on this as well, but I like to chunk them into categories, right? So there are conversations that we want to have about our identity and our purpose. There are conversations we want to have that will help us focus and make choices. And then there are conversations that we want to have that will help us determine how we want to work together, or something like that. And then again, a coaching principle and practice is to start where they are.
Mm-hmm.
What's most concerning to you about your team today? And then you can start introducing that way. Does that help?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, not to try to, which is typical of me, like, okay, let's go for the full package.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go by little pieces, and depending on the situation, the needs, the challenges that they are going through at the moment. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
And just for those who are entering the practice at the Institute, we typically the first whole year project, which takes place towards the end of the year, is just introducing one distinction or one practice to a team. And oftentimes those teams will report great value, just having one.
Thank you, Barbara.
Welcome.
Newell, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a beautiful setup, Barbara. As I think about what I do, first of all, I think we're in huge flux these days. That's why I put the question there. I mean, I've worked with teams over and over again, and the membership is changing more frequently. Leadership is changing more frequently. the situation they're in, the unforeseeables post-COVID is changing fast. So the old way I did team development isn't working, right? It's how do we get them on board in a trusting dynamic quickly? What I'm finding I use what, Richard Hughes and Bob Moore put together in terms of the team conversation survey as a tool to jump right into the whole thing, where they have to ask, basically using the 13, although they're still using the old 10, as a framework for people to really kind of just embed themselves in it by doing a self-assessment as a team. And then it always shows up as trust is always an issue. So universally, so we start having the trust and psychological safety conversation. But it really gets them to look holistically at what are the essential conversations for an effective team. So that's kind of my go-to for the.
Love that. Love that. And in addition, we know that that trust is a verb. Excuse me. And so, trust is all of those. We generate trust when we engage with those conversations in the way that we've said we would, right? So we make promises that we are committed to fulfill. And when we listen that there's not a commitment, we say it, right? And all of those things that go along with trust. Thank you so much, Noel. Always have appreciated you and the work that you've done. And I'm glad that you mentioned Richard and Bob and the work that they've done. Yeah, awesome.
And Barbara, Carrie mentions the 13 conversations. He wants to know if it's rhetorical or identifiable, and he'd like to hear the primary questions we need to be asking in addition to those mentioned today. I would like to make
enrolled in the program, right? Go ahead, Stella, with what you were going to say, because it's
I was going to say, Barbara had suggested earlier that we share a resource. I don't know if you wrote it or Bob wrote it, but we do have Bob, the 13 constitutive conversations of the team. And so, Vaishnavi, not to put you on the spot, but could you dig that up? Could you put your finger on it for anyone that wanted it? Whew, okay, we'll see. We're going to commit on that one. I'm hoping that Vaishnavi might be able to say yes. And then, Carrie, I can get that to you, and anyone else that might be interested, maybe just send an email to the team or to whoever your person is in this conversation, and we can certainly disseminate that information. I'm just mindful of our time, and I want to get everyone where they're going to next. So a couple things. One, I just want to say thank you again for being here and for being contributions to this conversation. It has been such a rich conversation. I also would love to remind you and invite you that if you're like, oh, it's been a while, or I'd like to be in these conversations more, there is a Foundations for Generative Leadership 2.5-day course coming up in October. We will be sending you an email with all the details, whether you have done some training with the Institute before, whether it's been a year or 2 or 10, or you're new to the practices. There is so much here that in this community that we have to offer, and you can take this this conversation. It doesn't have to be the last one. So keep your eyes on your inbox. If you are someone that would like to have a conversation before you sign up, there is also a link to do that and have a conversation with Managing Partner and CEO Greg Carl. There's a link to do that in your email. Barbara, I want to say thank you for being here and for sharing your wisdom in a way that only you can. And I also ask, as we're wrapping up, we've got 2 minutes left. I also request that if you'd like to share a little bit from your corner of the world, everybody, about what you're taking with you from what Barbara has said. What has been the gift from this conversation today? You can just leave that in the chat. And then after this conversation is finished, I'm sure she'll take a look and she'd just appreciate seeing what this has been for you. It is our intention to hold these conversations so that it can spark a new way of thinking about a situation that you might be finding yourselves in. So thank you for being here. Barbara, there's a whole bunch of notes here. Maybe we can stick around afterwards, or we can make sure that you get those comments here today. Thank you everyone for being here. We will see you for the next conversation next month. Bye for now.